Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Friends Occasionally Not Disagreeing. I'm Justin. I'll be your host tonight, and we've got a pretty full house here today. With me are Cody, Joe, and Brett, and we are here to talk about a little indie game that I kept hearing a bit about, but never checked out, mainly because of how it looked. But before we get to that, let's find out what's been going on with all of our lives and such. Let's see. Brett, what's new with you?
Well, I've been pretty silent about it recently, but I have been continuing to work hard behind the scenes on making more AI music. Um,
All right.
it has continued to be a side hobby project that I've been working on. Um, and I actually just a few days ago released I guess technically I, I guess technically you call them albums. They also feel like more like collections of music, but I am on my fourth album that I've released. So
Oh,
um
oh,
that is currently available on a whole bunch of places. Let's see, Apple, and it's on Spotify and YouTube and Pandora and a bunch of other little places you can stream music as well. So, um, this one I like the first one I made. I just kind of was very early. Well, the very first one I made was the podcast songs that I made, which were for the most part just kind of like just silly and fun. And then I made an album that was just kind of like in the end it ended up being more like a the best way I could describe it is like a soundtrack for a movie that doesn't exist. Like it was very loosely tied together thematically. Um, and then I made a 6-track album of songs for my wife for our anniversary, and so that's on there available. And this last one I made is I would call my first, like, the closest thing to a true album of music that I made so far. 12 tracks, six of which are instrumentals, but they are all the best way I could put it is they kind of um, investigate like my inner thoughts on a lot of topics. So um, I absolutely put the most work into lyrics and quality on this one. I feel like I've gotten quite a bit better through this whole process, but it's been interesting. It's actually been interesting along the way and um, fun for the most part. Though I do get a little bit worn out from trying to like write lyrics at times. Sometimes my brain's just like, I can't do this. I need to take a break. So, but anyways, that's out there. That's been the biggest thing I've had recently.
nice, nice. Let's see. Keep going down the line. Joe, what about you?
Oh boy. Um, Actually wanted to mention two movies I have watched. One more recently than the other. Over the weekend, I finally got around to watching a movie that I've been wanting to check out for a while, which is The Northman, which is the third film by Robert Eggers, who also directed The Witch and The Lighthouse. Which have kind of be I feel like he is one of my favorite directors working right now. I actually watched his first two movies, The Witch and the Lighthouse, last year. Really liked them. Wanted to watch The Northman and just hadn't got around to it until recently. But it's so The Northman is basically Hamlet. It's actually based on a Scandinavian legend, I think, about a Prince Amelith who was the direct inspiration for Shakespeare's Hamlet. But it is a much more violent and brutal version of the story. It stars Alexander Skarsgård as the titular Northman and Prince Amelith. And it is just like gory and awesome and weird as Robert Eggers tends to be. I don't know what kind of drugs that guy is on, but like all of his films are just like super weird and out there, but whatever wavelength he's on seems to work for me. He actually has a new version of Nosferatu, which is going to be his fourth film that's coming out this Christmas, and I'm super excited about that.
Me too.
The other movie I wanted to shout out is one I actually watched a couple weeks ago now, but I don't think I have had a chance to mention on a previous podcast, and that is Casa Bonita, Mi Amor. And that is a documentary that I believe is on Paramount Plus, and it's about the creators of South Park, Matt Stone and Trey Parker, buying their,
Casa bonito,
well,
sí.
yes. It turns out that Casa Bonita is an actual restaurant in Colorado that specifically Trey Parker, but also Matt Stone to a lesser extent, kind of grew up going to and have always loved. As Cody kind of suggested, it became a location in South Park, both the show and at least one of the video games. And so this documentary is kind of about them buying the restaurant, um, discovering that it was a complete disaster and needed to be almost entirely gutted and rebuilt. Um, and it's just kind of interesting seeing what happens when you throw a bunch of money into living a weird childhood pipe dream and may kind of end up regretting it. But yeah, I mean, honestly, for anyone who's a fan of South Park and those two gentlemen, which I think we all are, I recommend checking it out. And honestly, for a wider audience, I think it's just kind of a fascinating watch. Like they really get into a lot of the nitty-gritty as far as how much is involved in this undertaking, both, emotionally and financially. Spoiler alert, it ends up costing them, I think, over 10 times the amount they paid for the restaurant to actually get it up and running again. So if you have Paramount Plus, definitely recommend Casa Bonita, Mi Amor.
Oye,
Cool, cool. Cody, how about you?
taco flavored cheesies. I'll just do a couple quick hits. I wrapped up my November book of the month just barely on the plane coming back to Illinois, and it was pretty good in the end. We're on to book two. I think will be my December book of the month if I get to that. But that was The Ally of Law by Brandon Sanderson. That was pretty good. And I have been spending, thankfully, I'm not going to complain about it, some time playing Tears of the Kingdom still since I restarted that. And it's been really fun to just go around that world and just see all the stuff that's in it and all the different options you have and freedom and how great the open world was in part one. It's just as good in part two. I think because it's been like 7 or 8 years, whatever, since I played the first one. I feel like I'm overconfident though at times where I'll like see this giant boss in the distance and be like, I got 3 hearts, I can take this thing, no problem. Forgetting that I had like 20 or whatever at the end of the other game when all was said and done. So, but it's been fun. I've been like trying things that are probably too hard for me and I'll die like maybe 4 times. Then the fifth time I'll figure out some strategy that'll work to beat it. So it's actually been a lot of trial and error that I've had a lot of fun with, just like using resources and finding a method that's going to win that particular challenge, whatever it might be. And I've been exploring in the underworld as well with all of my resources that I had basically burned out while I was down there. I used up pretty much everything I had to stay alive and try to explore a little further than I should have. But I was having fun, again, pushing the boundaries of like what should and shouldn't be allowable. But it's kind of fun to have your skill kind of mitigated by like what points you actually have saved up at that, what attributes you have at that point in time. So it's kind of fun. Let me think. Otherwise, not a heck of a lot beyond that, I don't think. I did finally finish the Castlevania series, the first one. Did enjoy that all the way through, so that was kind of fun. Ending threw me for a little loop in that last episode. I thought it was going to end the one way, and then it kind of switches and ends the other way for the last couple minutes of the show. But I'll probably check out Nocturne sometime here coming up as well. The sequel series, or I don't know, sequel or prequel or what technically, but I'll find out when I get into it, I guess. And yeah, just looking forward to chatting with you guys tonight.
Nice, nice. Um, well, in terms of movies on my side of things, most of what I've been watching lately has been really bad Christmas themed horror movies.
Oh, why would you do that?
It's a mystery to everyone. But you know, it's that time of year, and you know, the bug just kind of bit me a little bit. Let's just say, um, there's a lot of them. Most of them aren't very good, but it's been an experience. I'll put it that way. Um, Aside from that, I have finally gotten sucked into the black hole that is Balatro, uh,
Yay!
courtesy of Joe mainly. I'd heard of the game, but looking at it, it's just like it's just poker, and you get like different jokers, and it didn't seem like it would be at all really something that would keep my interest. But overwhelmingly positive reviews on Steam. It's a Game of the Year contender at the Game Awards, or maybe has already won or something. I don't know like when those actually happen. So I finally decided to check it out. You know, the Steam's winter sale is going on right now, so I'm like, okay, I can get it for cheap. Picked it up, and yeah, it is probably my favorite game that I've played this year, just because
Oof.
it's simple and it's fun, and there's a lot to discover, a lot of synergies that you can uncover, and it's just if you're coming home after a long day and you don't really have the brain power or the attention span for something more involved, it's a very good way to relax. And yeah, that earns it a place in my heart. But yeah, Balatro is worth the hype. So feel free to check it out. I would highly recommend it. But that's not the game we're talking about today. The game we're talking about today came out a few years back. It is Faith, the Unholy Trinity by Airdorf Games, published by New Blood Interactive. Available on PC and Switch. I thought it was on PlayStation and Xbox too, but I am not 100% sure on that after there was a bit of uproar about that when we first talked about playing this. But uh,
Uproar.
The Wikipedia does just list Windows and Switch.
okay, I must maybe there were plans to port it that haven't happened, or they fell through or something. Or I'm just experiencing my own little Mandela effect right here. I don't know. But so Faith, it is a little indie horror game, and by little I mean it is styled after like God, what was the Atari 2600, like 4-bit? It like that era of gaming. It's very plain primary colors a lot of the time. There's scan lines that are built in. The sound effects are very rudimentary. There's voice acting, but it's like through a 1980s synthesizer kind of filter. And that's really kind of what kept me from trying this out for a while. But again, like Balatro, the reviews were very positive on Steam, and it kept coming up in like recommended horror games of the past couple of years. And another one I decided to give a try and pitched to the rest of these gents. And together we're going to find out whether this one's worth it or not. So, did you guys, was this at all on your radar before I threw it out there as a topic, or was it completely new to you?
Fairly certain
I had
I'd
never heard
never,
of it.
yeah, never heard of it.
Nope.
Okay. Oh, well, yeah, it's I follow a lot of like indie game reviewers on YouTube, and that's kind of how it showed up for me.
For all we know, you and Hudson put this together and tricked us.
Well, it's three more sales on the docket. But no, this looking at it's one of those things where if you just look at a standard screenshot, it looks like it came out 35 years ago at least. And the idea of a horror game set in this very simple style it's a weird one because you wouldn't think like, you know, something with the graphics of Pac-Man would be able to be a scary experience. But then you see the cutscenes, and it's like it's like if somehow they managed to get rotoscoping work on an old Atari where there it's and I think all these were rotoscoped where it's actual people, but it's 2 to 4 color graphics acting out whatever they were doing, and it's a really weird effect. Um, so old school, but with a modern polish at times. Um, before we get to like the story of it and whatnot, did the aesthetics work for you guys? Because it is a very unique look. Or do you think it was just trying to do too much with a very limited set of resources?
I thought the presentation was fine. It was kind of a serviceable throwback to like earlier game styles, graphically and um, the audio. I had some issues with the audio, but I did enjoy what they tried to do with the audio as well.
Yeah, I agree with Cody. I thought overall the aesthetic worked really well. It definitely succeeded in invoking the feel of those classic games. And I agree that I had some issues with the audio that I'm sure we'll talk about as we get further into this.
Uh, yeah, I did enjoy that it was very much like exactly like you would imagine those old Atari games. Like really, really base level graphics. And I like that, but also at times I was like, man, this is like really like almost pushing it too far down that path. Like, I feel like they could have like had a bit more detail perhaps in the graphics. Because a lot of times it was just like what I don't even know what I'm even looking at. Exactly. It's just like just imagine what it might be, I suppose. But um I did enjoy that it kind of stuck to that that aesthetic.
Yeah. And before we really jump into what the game's about, I do want to build off of what Brett said about not quite knowing what you're looking at. That works in horror a lot of the time. Like I've over the past couple of years, I've really developed a fondness for PS1 style graphics for horror games because it has that like jitteriness to the textures and things don't quite look like how they should, and lends kind of a surreal quality to it. And I think that works better for horror than for a lot of other genres. And whether or not it works for pixel art, I'm not 100% sure yet, but it's definitely an interesting take. Um, so with that out of the way, the major hurdle that most people are going to have, being how this game looks, how's the game itself? Well, Faith is the story of a Catholic priest. Well, he might actually be a Catholic priest, or he might be completely insane and just be pretending to be one. That's up for debate. But returning to the site of a botched exorcism after a year has gone by and finding out that things have spiraled far, far out of control and far out of scale to just one little girl being possessed. Um, and the story progresses through a series of 3 chapters, each one more or less building on the story of the one before it. There's some jumps and some changes in setting. But yeah, it starts from kind of The Exorcist and leads into something far, far stranger. Um, did you guys? I figure we can like go into depth on the story a little bit later, but did you like the way it was framed, like the 3 separate acts and the kind of disparate things all coming together, or did not work for you? Or
Maybe we want to take a point on that one.
I will say for my part, I honestly thought it was kind of unnecessary. Like, I mean, the name of the game, Faith the Unholy Trinity, suggests 3 things, and then when I saw that it was divided into 3 distinct parts, I was like, that could be an interesting structure for a game if the 3 different parts felt distinct or different enough. And I didn't feel like they did. It all feels like it is just all part of the same whole. Um, I think it would have been interesting if there were maybe like different gameplay styles or different presentations or something if you're going to try to divide it this way. Otherwise, I don't really see the point of doing it other than Holy Trinity, Unholy Trinity. It feels a little bit forced to me.
It did. Yeah, the three chapters were a little bit unique. Just you don't really have games where you, at least like in the mode that I played, I just played just like a chapter at a time and then a chapter. And you do have a mode where you can play. I think it's available right from the start where you can play marathon mode where you play like basically all through three chapters at the same, in one playthrough. But as it is, you essentially finish a chapter and then it's like, okay, you're done, and you go back to the menu. And you don't like
Yeah.
continue on to the next chapter immediately. And technically, you could go and start chapter 3 after chapter 1 if that's what you wanted to do,
Yeah,
which
that's
would be an
true.
interesting choice.
Yeah,
Um, but it seems to me like the three chapters primarily serve a point of having like three character stories. I think you played, are you, well, like chapter 1 and 3 are like the same character, but chapter 2 you're a different character, right? If I remember right.
chapter two, I think you start as a different character, but then you end up being the same character
You're John
again.
again by the end. That could be, yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah, I
true.
think there's like a time jump during part of chapter 2
I think
or
for
some.
like I think for me, if even if each chapter had its own self-contained story, it would work for me better. But the fact that it does feel like this is all one, continuous narrative. I mean, there's, some flashbacks and things like that, but it is all telling the same story. And that makes me feel like it's a little bit more just I don't want to say it's like pretentious, but it feels forced, like I said. I don't know. What did you think about it, Cody?
I didn't have a problem with the three chapter setup as it's overtly laid out in. I did have maybe some quibbles with this could be Cody Dense Gamer again, but I had problems with trying to follow this story from point A to point B to point C again in this one, and I don't know if it's because they felt like the graphics were simple, so they had to like make the story as convoluted as possible or what, but like there's pieces to the story that you don't necessarily even get if you don't do certain things, and therefore to like assemble the pieces together to make the whole picture, I mean, kind of was like a little off-putting is the wrong word, but it was a little harder for me to follow along with some of these things when they like reference something and I'll be like, wait, I thought that already happened, or this hasn't happened yet, or how does this character tie into this again? Who's this person? Um, and one other quibble here, I don't know if you want me to bring this up, Justin, or not, but did we ever solve the mystery of the chapter two prologue? What is the story with this? This is still confusing to me.
So did you ever actually where you get to the point where you could play it or no?
I never got to play it, but I also never went out of my way to go look for it either.
Okay. I after my first playthrough of like chapters 1 through 3, I went back to try and get some different endings and different, story paths and whatnot. And after I got through chapter 1 again, I went to chapter 2 and there was an option for the prologue then. So I think it's like a new game plus thing where you have to play through it once and then you see the prologues. At least that's how it worked for me.
I
I
think from what I've read, I think it depends on
the ending?
your ending for
Oh, okay.
chapter one.
Okay.
I
Yeah,
think there's
because I
maybe only one of the possible endings that actually gets you the prologue for chapter two.
Oh, okay, because I did get a different ending in chapter 1 in my second playthrough, and then I saw the chapter 2 prologue. So okay, that must have been what
It's
triggered
kind of
it.
what the Wikipedia entry for this game is hinting at, but even there it doesn't come out and say it, but it kind of says like it continues after what the fifth ending was of chapter one. But all the stuff I read about this chapter two prologue doesn't seem like it's an insignificant amount of game that I missed, unfortunately, which is, you know,
Yeah.
for as short as the game is, to miss an hour or two of the game, or even just an hour, is like that's a chunk of the game that I didn't get to play. So,
That's
Yeah,
fair.
I never unlocked it myself either. I only was aware of it
Oh,
because you guys had talked about it.
hmm.
So
so the prologue for chapter 2 goes into like the history of the ghost woman you see in the church and like the scarecrow in the field. And I feel like at this point we're kind of like we're jumping the gun and we need to talk a bit more about what the story actually is. Because that will make absolutely no sense to anyone listening to this. So let's do a chapter by chapter breakdown. That's probably the easiest way. So, chapter one, it's again your character John Ward, possibly Father John Ward, possibly not, depending on if he's actually a priest, returning to the Martin household, which is kind of a not a rundown old shack, but it is a house out in the middle of the woods that's seen better days. A year ago, he and another priest, I believe it was Father Garcia, tried to perform an exorcism on the daughter of the family named Amy. Things went wrong. He's back to try and finish what he started. And most of chapter one is just the house and the surrounding area, the woods around it and stuff. So that involves like leaving your car, going through the woods, being chased by this, pale, shrieking monster that, appears at the edge of the screen that you can chase off with your crucifix, and, finding a few other things here and there. When you get to the house, you have to explore it a bit. You find out Amy's not actually gone, and you have to try and finish what you started. And that can mean either going through trying to exorcise her, and then at the end you meet a choice. And I think this determines which of the multiple endings you get in chapter one.
Exercise, Amy, exercise.
But yeah, you go through like the boss fight of that, and then you come downstairs, and then
Who are you gonna shoot?
Yeah, there's scrawled in blood on the floor. It says either shoot her or kill her, and there's like a gun with one bullet laying on the floor. And depending on who or what you decide to shoot, that changes what ending you get. The first time I found her in the woods and I shot her because she was like covered in blood and missing half of her face. And that got
You
me
wrong with
bastard. You. So this is why you're wondering if he's really a priest.
The second time I found a shadowy figure in the woods and I shot him instead. Amy disappeared. All the other stuff that I could interact with disappeared. And I got back in my car, drove off, and the thing that had been roaming the woods was in the back seat. It lunged forward and it killed me.
Oh.
So I don't know how I exist in chapter two after that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, which leads me to why I stopped doing my second playthrough, because suddenly I'm alive, and there's like a newspaper clipping in chapter two you find that references the events in chapter one, but it still says I shot Amy, even though this was a second playthrough and I had done a different act. So it's like I saw that and I'm thinking, well, how much does the story actually change and connect at that point? And I don't know, because, well, I didn't press on. At some point I will, because there's a whole bunch of different endings to each chapter in this, but I do feel like they could have tied things in a little more cohesively depending on your actions.
I wondered about that. Like, I wondered if it truly did change everything else you find in the game if you choose not to shoot Amy.
That's what I was hoping. But yeah, I mean, the fact that I was ostensibly dead because, I crashed the car and there was like blood,
Yeah.
spurting out of my neck from where this thing clawed me to death. Yeah, I have a lot of questions for how I'm still alive in chapter two. But speaking of chapter two, that is the one that begins with a different priest, and I can't remember. Is this Father Garcia? Is it one of the other?
I think it is Father Garcia.
Okay,
Yeah.
where he is at his home, trying to exorcise the pale, creepy creature that killed me at the second ending of chapter one. That was roaming the woods. That apparently is or was a little boy named Michael Davies, who also is possessed by demons, and Father Garcia may or may not also be a priest. He may have just kidnapped this boy and is trying to exorcise a fake demon from him. This might all be in his head. It's hard to say. At least once you see how certain other things play out. But anyway, that goes sideways. The demon kid escapes, and then it flashes forward to I think the present, where you're back playing John Ward again, and either have been released from prison after murdering Amy, or have somehow returned from the grave, or it's not really sure. It's not really clear. Like, did that confuse you guys too? Like, even if you do the first ending I got in chapter one, where you shoot the possessed Amy, the police show up and they arrest you, and suddenly there's no explanation for like how you're back out on the street, unless there was something I missed.
No, I wondered about that too. I also shot Amy in the first chapter.
Okay.
Cody's shaking his head, which makes me, yeah, he also did.
Highly susceptible to the suggestion of words written in red blood, apparently.
Yeah, but yeah, I thought that too. It's strange that like all of a sudden you're just like out free, even though you're being accused of being a murderer and not a real priest.
I will say that this chapter, I think, ends with like your character waking up in bed.
Yeah,
So you could argue maybe it's a dream sequence, but either way, he's still alive. But I thought it was just him, after the events of this chapter were done, trying to get back to a normal life and being tormented by what he did. There's a lot that's up for interpretation in this game. But let's see. So a lot of chapter two revolves around this old church that is abandoned. There's a little side plot about like a paranormal investigation crew, or like they might have even been YouTubers. I don't remember, but they're going in trying to get footage of ghosts, and you find like there are notes from them as you're exploring this church, and there's of course a spirit that's inhabiting it, and uh, that you have to like hold up your cross. And really, the only gameplay in this is like walking around and pressing the action button, which holds up like a crucifix and drives demons away or hurts them, depending on the context. Um, Sometimes you'll find flashlights. Sometimes you'll find a handful of other items that you like the gun that you can use. But for the most part, it's walk around and press X to exercise. So anyway, there's a part in the church where that kind of goes sideways as well. You end up in a graveyard where there's several different things you can do, other spirits you have to exercise. You end up stabbing yourself in the eye with a cross, I think. And then at some point you turn into this weird little like squiggly monster that runs into underneath an overpass and turns normal again. And okay, this is a pretty wild departure from like what happens in the first chapter, and we're not even done with it yet. How did you feel about like the shift in terms of like what happens to your character and like the lack of explanation for how he turns back? Did you think this was all in his head? Did you think the stuff was really just happening in the real world in the game, or what? Because at this point, I had questions.
Yeah, this is where they get a little exploratory with like what the game is actually going to be, and they kind of went the middle ground on this, which probably would not have been my preferred method. Like I wish they would have either leaned into like the craziness a bit more, or maybe just played a little straighter with how it had been prior to that. Um, because if you have limited elements that seem out of place from the rest of the game, then they do seem more out of place to the rest of the game, I feel like.
Okay. Any
yeah,
comments?
I was just really confused. Like I honestly for most of this game, especially after chapter one, I was just kind of going along for the ride, I felt like. I mean,
Okay.
I think I got the gist of most of what was happening, like, satanic cult stuff, trying to summon demons and whatnot, but I felt like the people who made this game had a more specific story in mind, and I didn't necessarily feel like I picked up on a lot of it. And part of that might be, I think Cody said earlier that like it kind of depends on what you find in the game. I know that there are all these notes all over the place that you get by exercising random inanimate objects, which is kind of weird.
Like a puddle of water at one point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know for a fact that I did not find all those notes, so I don't know if maybe that would have filled it in even more, but yeah, like when weird stuff like this happened where you're turning into that weird squiggly thing, like I didn't really follow what was happening necessarily, but I just kind of went along with it.
Yeah, pretty similar thoughts. I think chapter one was fine as far as following along, and then like the start of chapter two was fine, and then there definitely was a point where I was kind of like, I don't know what's going on anymore. And yeah, I was going to bring up the notes mechanic as well, in that there's um it's something like I don't know how many there are per chapter. But I know like in the last two chapters, like 40 plus notes per chapter to find. And I probably found maybe half of them, which I have no idea where the rest of them are then. Like, because like I would just walk around just throwing my cross at everything I could find. So I don't know where the rest of them are at. Um, but yeah, I think a lot of the lore and the story, I think, is kind of contained within those notes. And if you don't find them, I feel like you really can very easily get lost in what's actually going on. And for me, there was a point where I just kind of like I wasn't really trying to follow the story anymore. I was just kind of like riding along and seeing what kind of like crazy, weird, spooky, you know, graphics were like, scenes we're going to get in the next couple chapters. So
Sure.
The notes for me were like I was big time invested into those in chapter one, where I was like, she would like, is it Amy that you fought in chapter one? I forget. However,
Yeah.
you kept dying towards the end of it. I'd like die, and then when I'd restart, I'd go back through the forest and recollect every note again. Because I was like, this has got to be important to have every note when you go to do this. So I'd collect them all and she'd kill me. I'd go back, I'd collect them all and she'd kill me.
Oh,
And then after a while, I started to realize, like, I don't think you can get the rest of these notes unless you're working towards one of the different endings. Like, I don't think you can get them all in one playthrough. Is that correct, Justin? Is that where they're all at?
that I'm not sure. Like, I
Okay.
never found all of them either.
Yeah,
I
similar
found
to
it.
Brett, like, I was doing well, and then all of a sudden I was like, I don't know where these all are at because that's all I could think
Yeah,
of. Where else would they be? I don't know.
yeah. I looked at a Wikipedia entry for some random subject on this or another. I think it was looking into the chapter two prologue, and I did happen to stumble across like a little section about how you got one of them in chapter one, and it's like you have to do a really obscure and kind of counterintuitive set
Hmm.
of actions in order to do it. Like there's an entire boss I didn't fight in chapter one because I didn't think to do a certain thing. So it's like there are a lot of secrets in this game, and a lot of different things you can uncover, and it seems like a lot of it does not. It's like Castlevania 2 in that sense. It's
Yeah.
not really obvious necessarily what you have to do.
I will say too, was it Joe that mentioned like just running around, or maybe it was you, Justin, that run around just like holding up the cross to the inanimate objects. But it's like, um, to me, the quintessential game series has always been Resident Evil, where you just like spam the wall and like tap A repeatedly or whatever to see if you can find something while you're searching. And this was like that, but like thematically made even less sense than that game because in that game, at least you're like, I'm searching for anything that would be usable. In this game, I'm literally just picturing like a cross who's like literally walking around the world, just like, where are you? I have to find something to
Is is this
exercise.
tree evil?
Yeah, we don't know.
This game is the polar opposite of thank goodness you're here.
In a
Both
way, yeah.
both games with like a single gameplay mechanic, but on very different ends of the spectrum in terms of tone and genre.
You're not wrong. Not wrong. I do want to go back to something you said earlier about how it feels like the developers have a really they had a set story, like a very specific story they were looking to tell. It's interesting that you say that, considering how much of this feels like it's kind of just random happenstance. Like after you turn into the squiggle monster, you end up in a drainage ditch that you can't climb out of, so you just wander into like a sewage system that has candy tunnel written over the top of it, and there's just like a monster or a serial killer turned monster that happens to live in the tunnel. And sure, it's implied that he's connected to the cult, which you get your first look at or first impressions of in chapter two. But I mean, it just feels very random. And when you first run into that whole thing, it's like, what does this have to do with anything aside from it just being a demon in the sewers? Um,
A lot of history down that tunnel.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I could be wrong. I'm just speculating, but like to me, it did kind of feel like they had a larger mythology sketched out or in mind. I think you're hitting on a point that I think maybe was part of the problem for me, which is chapter one feels like it is kind of smaller in scale. Like it feels more specifically about the exorcism of this one person. And then by the time we get into chapter three, it feels like this large scale conspiracy where there's this cult that's, murdering people and trying to like recruit people into the cult. And there's all this just
the second
increasingly
death
crazy
and
shit
all
going
that.
on.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's closer to a Rambo movie at that
Yeah.
point. One man versus an entire cult
There's
with
like,
only
you
a
know, like
cross.
large scale police shootouts going on. It's just like it really escalated quickly.
I mean, yeah, that is a fair point. Uh, um, so yeah, that's mainly chapter two to it, the church and then the sewer system. And then chapter three is you mentioned, yeah, actually chapter one being kind of small and contained and then ballooning outwards from there. Each chapter in this does get progressively longer in scope too, where it's like two felt like it was a very sizable chunk, and then three just goes for miles pretty much.
I did
Um,
message you guys at one point earlier asking if this game ever ends. When I was in chapter three.
That's fair. But yeah, chapter three takes you from investigating the clinic where Amy volunteered at, apparently before she got possessed by demons, and then finding like something that's lurking there, and then you end up at an apartment building that's also haunted and possessed by demons, and that's where like the cult is sort of headquartered, and there's the basement area, which is like a TARDIS, because it shouldn't be that big, but there's this whole cavern system underneath that you have to find your way through and possibly completely fuck up like I did, because there was a section where you're supposed to like change the orientation of chairs as a puzzle. And I apparently failed enough times that this guy just like ran out from behind a statue and stabbed me in the neck with a syringe. And then I couldn't do that.
Oh,
I couldn't do that anymore. And so I was like, the story just progressed without me solving that puzzle. It was
So I don't think
interesting.
you can solve that puzzle. I think that's what is
Okay.
supposed to happen in that point.
Okay.
I think it's
Yeah,
just
I
yeah.
also
I
got
think
that.
yeah. I think after you try for a certain amount of time, that just happens.
Okay. Interesting.
I thought I
I
did
don't.
solve the puzzle, but still got stabbed, so I don't know now.
Yeah, which like the hints on that puzzle are like incredibly confusing.
I
It's
mean,
like
they make a
like
little
double
sense.
negatives and like the descriptions is like what is going on here?
Yeah, like if you know a bit about demonology, they make a bit more sense, because it's like you can identify the names of the demons to what the like the faces on the wall. But even that, I was having a hard time getting the chairs to line up. It was,
This
yeah.
is the most Justin Henry shit I've ever heard. If you know even a little bit about demonology, you're just gonna recognize those demons on that wall.
Do you want me to pop off on this? Because I can. I know things.
Ooh.
I drink and I know things. This is what I do. uh,
Did you know
but
that Gary is just a normal human being like you?
yeah, he's a regular
I
stand-up
believe
guy,
He's
an
it.
absolutely
just a
normal human.
regular human man.
And he loves you.
Gary does love you.
Uh, but yeah, so you eventually like fight your way through this series of catacombs, and you know where the cultists that you run into are getting increasingly like less human as you go, and it's like there's probably the most puzzles in this than in any other portion of the game. And so you're like fending off these horrible Resident Evil 4 8-bit looking things, you know, that are like trying to kill you as you're trying to shuffle statues around and stuff. And eventually you reunite with Father Garcia for the final showdown.
Can I
And
ask a quick question? I'm sorry to interrupt.
oh, go for it. Yeah.
Do you want to play some red light, green light?
Yeah, that was an
I kind of felt
interesting.
like they ran out of puzzle ideas at that point. They're just like, well,
Yeah, yeah. So, for those of you listening at home, I mean, we're full into spoiler territory here, but you end up in this one long hallway at one point where an item is at the other end, right behind this cultist question mark, that is like huddled over facing the wall, and you step down into the hallway, and it's like, let's play red light, green light, and then it's just like silence for a bit. So I'm like, okay, I'll walk forward, and then it's like red light. It's just like like Squid Game, except in two colors.
Yeah.
And it like whips around, and if you move, you die. And then you had to like cautiously go forward and grab the thing, and then cautiously move back. And it was, yeah, it didn't necessarily
it's
feel like it fit.
silly.
It was silly. But it made for an interesting gameplay change, I guess.
I will
Because
say
there's like
when go ahead.
oh, go ahead. Oh, I
Yep.
was just gonna say, because there's like monsters that if you see them, you're not supposed to move, or you're not supposed to like be facing them. So they do try to change up certain scenarios sometimes, which does at least keep it somewhat
Yeah.
interesting.
I
But
feel like I think that the red light green light thing to me was the one point in this game where I was like, Honestly, I was surprised for the most part by how effective I thought this game was at being a horror game, given like the, kind of lo-fi presentation. But the red light, green light thing just kind of stuck in my craw as being just like ridiculous. And I feel like, especially since there are so many other parts in this game where they don't really give you strong clues. They'll give you maybe some abstract hints as to what to do. I feel like they could have had that same mechanic and just have it so that that figure like randomly switches which way they're facing, and you have to figure out that if they're facing one way, you can go. If they're facing the other way, you have to stop. But to literally say, let's play red light, green light, and have the cult figure say red light, green light, it just was ridiculous to me.
That's a
Yeah.
great point.
Yeah. And actually, now that you bring that up, I can think of an instance of this exact mechanic done in a different game, but done much better. Um, My Friendly Neighborhood. There's this a sequence where you have to like sneak your way through this like storage room where there's one of the killer puppets that's doing something, and there's like a light kind of on the wall. I think it's like attached to a door or something that like switches from red to green, and you figure out either through observation or through trial and error that, oh, I am playing red light, green light now. Like if I move when it's red, I die. But so it was very much environmental in that sense, instead of
Yeah.
just saying, yeah, let's play, just that sort of thing. In a game where that actually would have been more fitting, but yeah, it was implemented in a better way despite that. But yeah, My Friendly Neighborhood, also very good horror game. I recommend checking it out. Um, but yeah, so this whole sequence is it's long. It has some interesting elements, but it does kind of drag for a bit. And then you get to the main fight, which is another fight where you have to try and keep somebody else alive. And I forgot to mention, Chapter 2 has a fight like that too. I did not keep that priest alive. Uh, I think I did manage to keep Father Garcia alive at the end of Chapter 3. But I didn't find enough of the hidden seals or something like that. So I got, I think, the bad ending to the game, or I got an ending at any rate. But yeah, it involves like trying to protect him while he reads some sort of verse from the Bible to the demon that is trying to, break past him or whatever. And I ended up dropping like a sarcophagus onto a portal, onto a hole to hell in the ground or something like that. And it was an interesting final encounter. I'll say that much. But yeah, so it does definitely delve into a bit of like the cosmic horror territory with like the things from beyond trying to break through and reinvent the world in their image, kind of a thing. Um, and with the ending I got, uh, this is why I question whether any of these guys were actually priests, because Father Garcia. Oh no, wait, Father Garcia wasn't reading from a book. He had a freaking shotgun while you were trying to exorcise the demons. Their occultists are like
Yeah.
swarming in, so he's like blasting them. So yeah, he basically holds you at gunpoint and says, "No, no, you're working for me now. This is not a request." And he like abducts you and forces you to possibly feed into his delusions about other people that might or might not be demon possessed. Like you two may have just collectively murdered an entire building full of people that were just normal. It's hard to say.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I
You
think
guys
you
might have
got a
gotten.
different ending than I did.
Yep.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I got it. Where you drop the sarcophagus. He's like, we it's over for now, but we have more work to do. And it shows him like leaning against his car, smoking a cigarette, and your character's like, Father, I can't do this anymore. Thank you for your help, but I've got to go. He's like, no, you don't. And he holds up the shotgun and he like forces you into the car. So,
Weird. So my ending was similar, except he didn't force John to go with him. He like convinces John to go with him.
oh, he raised the gun at
Oh.
me. I'm
Yeah,
I'm 90% certain on that.
Yeah,
So
that was
I'm
mine as
looking.
well. I was at gunpoint.
I'm looking in the Wikipedia at the endings. It looks like it depends on if you save Lisa in the apartment building or not. If you
I
save
tried.
Lisa, he reassures John and convinces him to join. If John failed to save Lisa, Garcia forces him to join at gunpoint.
Let me just tell you,
Weird.
the boss
Sounds
fights where
like,
you have
yeah.
yeah, the boss fights where you have to protect another character in this game
Yeah.
are stupidly
Well,
difficult.
so going back to things being kind of inconsistent, you mentioned that you did not save the priest in chapter 2.
Yeah.
That was also Garcia. I also failed to save Garcia
Yeah.
in
Oh,
chapter
you're
two,
right.
and then he shows back up in chapter three as if nothing ever happened.
Right, there
I
was
was
that.
joking.
Like, so yeah, that is, I mean, that's definitely something that I think I have to kind of ding this game for. Like, I
Yeah.
don't know anything about the developers. I don't know if it was just like one guy or like, presumably a pretty small team.
Mhm.
So I don't want to be too harsh, but like
400 people.
it feels like especially when you're building in like multiple different endings and scenarios, you need to plan better for that sort of consistency.
Agreed. And apparently this was just one dude. His name
Hmm.
is Mason Smith.
Well, fuck you, Mason Smith. Learn how to make a better game, you dumbass.
Matt Hudson. Mason
Uh,
Smith is Matt Hudson. Yeah, I didn't get the gun. I didn't
uh,
get the gun pulled on me either. I think. So, am I reading that the third chapter has three endings? Is that ending
Yeah,
has
I believe
two
so.
I
variants?
think
So is that saying
so.
there's an ending and two variants? Because all I remember happening in mine was that John had doubt, but Father Garcia had asked him to join.
Huh.
But there's
it
definitely
looks,
no gun, and I don't feel like he reassured anybody.
yeah. So
Uh,
I think the two variations we just discussed are just like two variations on the same ending.
Okay.
Sounds like it.
It
Yeah.
looks like you get a different ending if you have done a few other things in the game that allow the crucible to be unsealed, and that
Okay.
leads to a much more involved sequence and crazy boss fight, it sounds like.
Cool.
And then that basically leads to you like, well, because the ending I got, which I'm assuming is similar to the one you got, Justin, um, Father Garcia says like it's over for now, but we didn't completely destroy Gary, so they might return someday.
Yeah.
But apparently, if you do things that allow the crucible to be unsealed and you go to like the ultimate boss fight, it's a more conclusive ending, like it's over. But then apparently there's yet another ending where you kind of do the cult's bidding and the profane sacrifice occurs, or the profane Sabbath occurs, and
Oh,
Satan wins.
Malthus wins. That's who they were trying to summon a different demon.
Melphis wins. Well,
Yeah.
the Antichrist.
Yeah, apparently the Antichrist is the secret boss, past
Yeah.
Malthus.
Huh. Interesting. Well,
But
yeah,
there's
yeah,
so many layers to those endings of like, what?
yeah. That's what I'm gathering here. Like the fact that I stumbled across talk of a secret hidden boss in the first act alone. It's like, okay, I had no idea.
Yeah,
Um,
apparently there are at least three secret bosses that you have to defeat in order to unlock the crucible,
oh, jeez.
like the titular Unholy Trinity.
Okay, that
Apparently I
does
never
make
fought any of
sense.
them, so there we go.
Yeah, I
I don't think I
definitely did
did
not.
either. And I think I might have been on the verge of unlocking one of them in the prologue of chapter two because if I had if I had gone back to my burning car and like set the scarecrow on fire instead of just walking
Your
up to the
burning
front of the
car.
church, yeah, there's
What
it
happened in your
What's
game?
what scarecrow? What are you even talking
this
about?
is the prologue of
I
chapter
saw
two.
the scarecrow and I was so mad because I went in the church before I investigated him, and then the game never let me go back out to investigate him, and I was like, no.
The prologue of chapter two is all about that scarecrow. I wish I were joking. I'm not. It's interesting. And I missed like one step at the end and
Do
died,
you
and I just like I could go back and play it again, but
do you have to help him find a brain?
um I think you have
Maybe.
to shove a torch in the gaping hole in his face. I think
Gross.
that's what you have to do. It's
Ah, Jesus Christ. Speaking of gaping holes in faces, the description of like what the second death is,
yeah, they don't pull any punches.
Jesus. I mean, Jesus has nothing to do with it. Like if
Yeah,
I
that's
read it correctly, it basically involves cutting a giant hole in someone's head and then passing a newborn infant through said hole.
What?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
You didn't see that part,
You
Cody?
didn't read
Or hear
that?
that part?
Where are you talking?
That was
It's
in
like
I
one of the
must
things. It's one of the things you can ask Gary when you're talking to him right before the
yeah.
final fight.
Oh,
Yeah,
don't you only get to ask like a couple questions?
Yeah, you get to ask three
Mhm.
questions, so maybe
yeah.
you didn't
No,
ask that
I might have
question.
missed out on the baby pass through the face question.
Yeah,
Cody
yeah,
was all like, "What happened to Amy? Is so and so okay?" I was like, "What is the
Probably.
ritual?"
yeah. What is? Tell me about the
Joe
demonic
Joe
ritual.
was like, "How much longer is this game?"
uh, so do we? I do want to talk a little bit about the gameplay. What little
Yeah,
there is, because like I said, it's walking around, it's holding up the cross, and like trying to find different ways of utilizing that in whatever situations available. Despite how simplistic it is, they did try to work in a lot of different things, and they don't really hold your hand with any of it. Like chapter one, after you get attacked by Amy the first time, and you're in the house, and it just says she's here, and you have to figure out how to fight back against her. It doesn't tell you how to do that.
right.
And I think I did it a different way than it was intended because I kept getting killed. And then I realized I could see her in the mirror in the bedroom if I walked by it, and like she got close enough. So I
Mhm.
held up the cross to the mirror and then drove her away. And like, okay, is it over? And then other rooms she's still walking around. So eventually I was like, okay, maybe I can just hold it up to where the footsteps are. And yeah, sure enough, that worked. But yeah, you can figure things out in your own way in this sometimes, and it's actually kind of a nice element, I think, even though it is a little clunky. So despite how limited the controls and stuff were, did you feel like there was enough variance in the gameplay as you went along to at least keep things enjoyable?
No,
Okay. Not enough smacky bum bum or whatever
not
from
enough smacky bumba. No, I mean, I honestly like I was prepared to just firmly say no to that. It's kind of I feel like it's a little tricky because it makes sense that if you are a priest fighting demons, all you really have is the crucifix. Like, I don't know what other gameplay elements they could really introduce. But I did feel, I mean, there are a couple like tricky things like the Amy situation you just described, but by and large, all of the like combat in this game is just aiming your cross at various demons and dodging different patterns that they move in. And like, yes, maybe learning those patterns is a little bit tricky, but it is still like the exact same gameplay. It's just they move in different ways, and you have to like hold your crucifix at them for different lengths of time. And I kind of got bored with that after, I mean, certainly a ways into chapter two. Um, I mean, they try to introduce a couple new things like the like flashlight, but that's those there or the camera in the apartments.
yeah.
That felt like something kind of different, but by and large, I felt like the gameplay was a little too monotonous for me after a while.
Everything that was introduced as like a new item though was like you used it for like this one singular purpose, and
Yeah,
then it was like gone after that.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's sad but true.
Which, would have been more interesting to Joe's point if there had been like, I don't know, a section you went into where you're like, should I have the crucifix out or should I have the camera out or should I have the torch or like a little more variety just to kind of keep you guessing a little bit more. So it did
Yeah.
feel a little funny to like run around and spam the cross the whole time. That's a phrase I never thought I'd use, but
Yeah. You're only holding like one item at a time. You don't have like inventory or anything like that. You don't select anything. You literally
Yeah.
only use one button the entire game.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and it did. There were points where I was like, I really wish that I had more to do because it was a bit dull. I feel like the puzzles broke things up enough to where I didn't get completely worn out with it. You'd find a puzzle or something, and you'd have to, figure that out, and then you weren't focused on the fact that you were only had this cross as your item of, to use. Um, but yeah, you're right. Like those, even when they broke things up with a different item, you'd literally only used it for um a few scenes, and then it was gone. So
Yeah. I will say for as limited as the game was, I did feel like they did a pretty admirable job of like making it fun with one button to press. I mean, I don't know that I could design a game where you press one button that would be as fun as that was.
I have a
Yeah, I.
question. Speaking of their attempts to vary up the gameplay,
Mhm.
how are you moving the hospital bed in that one sequence?
I think you're just like shaking your butt back and forth or something to
You're
like get
you're like
momentum.
tied down to this hospital bed, and somehow, I mean, you move slowly, but you're still able to like move it around and control it.
I assumed he was farting really badly.
That was yeah. Thinking back, yeah, that was a little silly now that you mention it. Uh,
But
but
thought the boss fights
yeah,
were
I
fun, the ones I got to play at least.
yeah. Honestly, I think the worst part of this for me was where the limitations of the gameplay really were evident. The apartment complex. They could have shaved like 5 floors off that thing because I went
Yeah.
through like every floor, checking every door and everything to make sure there weren't any notes that I missed, and that took for frickin' ever.
Yeah.
And most of them, it's just like nothing happens. There's a few where you'll get a note or a few that you can walk around in and like see someone who's been murdered or whatever. But a lot of it is just like the lock is rusted shut, Silent Hill type of stuff where it didn't need to be that expansive.
Yeah, there were
Um,
at least 2 or 3 floors of that apartment where neither room you could go into.
yeah,
So it was
yeah,
just you
just
walk through the hallway and then go up to the next floor.
yeah, not even like a
Elevator
jump
friend.
scare or anything. Just like, yeah,
I
and
actually
sure,
did
apart.
not encounter the elevator friend.
Oh, I did.
Oh,
I saw him, but I think I couldn't catch up to him. He was like always walking ahead with the kid,
hmm.
if I recall
Oh,
correctly.
I got deaded by it.
Oh, okay.
Elevator friend hugs
Just
too hard.
Yeah.
elevator friend.
But
Um,
anything else before we get into like rating this thing and whatnot?
I
Or
just wanted to ask what you guys thought of like the audio presentation in general, music, and the obviously deliberate attempt to make the voiceovers the way they were. Um, yeah, basically those two, I guess, starters.
I,
um,
I
oh, go
like
ahead.
the music. I appreciated what they were trying to do with the voice effects. As Justin mentioned in our chat, it was reminiscent of like the voice module for the Intellivision, which is the thing that I also had when I was younger. But while I appreciated what they were going for, I also thought it was fucking terrible. I felt like they overdid it. Like it if they wanted to do that, first of all, I feel like they needed to find a way to make it a little bit less jarring. But also I feel like they tried to have the creatures or characters say too much to where if they're really trying to capture the feel of a retro game like this,
Hmm.
there's like too much spoken dialogue to where like a game of that. I mean, I guess the same is true of the cutscenes because it would not have been able to have, that fluid of video, but it felt like they said too many different things.
And when the creatures were talking, there were generally no subtitles, uh,
Yeah.
which made it damn near impossible to understand what they were saying a lot of the time.
Yeah, that's fair. It was, and I didn't play a lot of Intellivision, but it seemed wildly inconsistent even in this game as far as like sometimes they would talk and I'd be able to understand every word, and then other times they'd talk and I'd get like every fifth word and be like, well,
I think some of it was
okay.
in Latin, which is part of the
Yeah,
problem.
I think
But
you're right.
Yeah,
but
that sounds
even
right.
when it wasn't, yeah. Brett, what about you?
I enjoyed the music overall. It was very loud. Like I when I played I played on Switch, about half the time I played handheld and about the other half the time I played on the TV. And when I played on the TV, I had to turn my TV volume down to like 7 or 8, and I normally listen to like 20.
Mm.
Yeah,
You know,
I have a sound bar and I literally had it like one click above muted. Like it was so
right?
loud that like
Yeah,
it
I
was
and it
literally like I wanted to be able to hear it, but it was like literally one notch above being muted.
yeah, and I'm pretty sure there's
Yeah,
a like a master volume setting, in the settings options. But the fact that you would need to turn down that like the default shouldn't be that loud. But
right.
Yeah.
um the music I enjoyed. I felt like it made it pretty it kind of pulled you in and made you feel like you were in this it's like the menu music is like basically just a straight up like hymnal, like a church hymnal.
Mm.
Um and like overall just the music worked really well. Um but I had similar issues with the voices, that they were too too immersive into this like incredibly old gaming styling.
Mm.
And I mean, it kind of added to the spookiness also, but at the same time, it like without the captions, I would have not known anything
Yeah.
they're saying. So
Yeah, I thought
Yeah.
the music for the game was serviceable. I didn't think it was fantastic, but it was enough that it was there. It was in the background. I kind of let you focus on what you were doing instead. I did want to also ask you guys, did you or did you not play with sidebars on?
Oh, I did.
I didn't know that was an option.
I didn't know it was an option either. I played with them on.
Yeah,
With
I
with
just
the
left it on.
weird multi-legged tree creature, or was that the
I've
default
got
one to start with?
arm from mouth is the one that I had on for most of mine.
Oh,
There you
I
go.
think mine was the default, which I think is the cover art, which is the multi-legged demon creature.
Mhm.
When I
Yeah,
went in the one time and was like, "Oh, you can turn these off," and there's like a blank option. I was like,
Yep.
Nah, I'm gonna put it back on."
I knew like along the way I was like earning backgrounds, but that never went and tried to like change them.
Mm.
Man, I could have saved some potential burden from my TV if I'd have known that.
Uh,
But the weird thing is, I didn't want to put it on like the black sidebars because then I was like, how do I know where the screen is supposed to end then? Like that's confusing. So I wanted
Yeah,
something
that's a good
there.
point.
that's fair.
Back to the audio. I have the Wikipedia pulled up, and this makes me even more curious about kind of the background of this game. According to the Wikipedia, much of the dialogue is presented through 80s era synthesized speech, with some voice lines and sound effects taken from real EVPs. That's electronic voice phenomena, which is used in ghost hunting, and exorcisms. One fight in particular uses actual recordings of the exorcism of Annalise Michel,
What the hell?
processed through the voice synthesis programs.
Holy shit.
So supposedly there's some real paranormal shit going on here.
Okay, that's going above and beyond. Wow.
Yeah.
That adds a factor that I wasn't prepared for.
Yeah.
Wow.
Same.
Recordings from a real life exorcism.
Wow.
Are we all cursed now? Is this part of like,
My
is the
mind was
developer
going, yes.
actually Gary?
Maybe.
No, the developer is a perfectly normal human
Just a
being.
normal
Oh.
human bartender, Jackie Daytona.
That's wild.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy.
Yeah, I mean, since I haven't really said a whole lot on the voices, I think as vocalizations for the monsters, it kind of works because they are supposed to sound inhuman and weird and terrifying. When you're struggling to understand what a regular person is saying, though, it's
Yeah.
odd. Like I almost feel it would have been better if the text from the human characters was just written and maybe like a blip, 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 kind of a thing, like old NES style. And then the monsters had this shrieking, horrible, inhuman sort of voice. I mean, that really would have emphasized how weird and otherworldly they are.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just
But
thinking the exact same thing, honestly. Like, I think it would have bothered me a lot less if it had gone that way.
yeah, but we got what we got. So, and the music, it worked. Nice chiptune-y, overly loud, but the composition of it was pretty decent, I think.
So much Moonlight Sonata.
Yeah.
Dear people putting music in anything, find some other Beethoven.
At least it wasn't Claire de Lune. That's used in a lot
That's
too.
fair.
Um, but yeah, any other things you guys wanted to touch on before we get to ranking this thing, or
I think that's all I got on my list.
okay? I will say I did get a smile out of the Easter egg in the credits. Like at the very end, it's ripped straight from the music video for Thriller. Basically words to the effect of it due to my deeply held convictions, I have to say that the work you have just witnessed is by no means an endorsement of the occult. That's something along those lines, and that's ripped straight from the opening to Thriller.
That's funny. I was trying to I fast forwarded through the credits and like I saw due to my deeply held beliefs or whatever, and I was like, no, what does that say? But it was too I had zoomed past it too quickly.
Uh, but yeah, that's the last thing I wanted to say before we get to ratings. Anyone want to go first, or should I take point on this? Okay,
Do it.
Do
Okay, I'll
it.
take point on it. Especially because I was the only one who'd heard of this before we jumped in. When I had first seen footage of this game and like heard a little bit about it, I didn't really give it much note. Like I said, it looked very primitive. And I'm not a very spiritual person, so it's a matter of the theme. I didn't think would really resonate with me, or keep me interested throughout like a 3 chapter long game. Um, but having seen it in action, especially like the cutscenes and stuff, and having seen how the story develops, there's more to it than just like an Exorcist ripoff, which is kind of what I was afraid it was going to be. Um, and yeah, in terms of like the story was hard to follow sometimes, but it was interesting. And knowing that there's a bunch of different endings and a bunch of hidden stuff I haven't even seen, this is one I'll come back to again at some point. It's just probably not right away. Um, the gameplay could have been touched up a bit here and there, especially that freaking apartment building. But overall, for especially a one-man project, I think this was surprisingly well done. Um, and I do look forward to seeing whatever this guy does in the future. This was pretty much the definition of the most indie of indie games, and I think he did a great job on it. Um, Not without its faults, but still a very enjoyable experience. I thought 7.5.
7.5. Doesn't mean to go next. Great.
Sure, go for it.
Okay. I thought it was pretty interesting. Justin showed us this game, and really what sold me on playing this were those rotoscoping sequences you were talking about with the seemingly like 8-bit or below video sequencing, which was I was really fascinated by how they could use like one color to essentially make like a really creepy looking animation of like the style of which maybe the like NES wouldn't have been able to run, but maybe it would have, and if so, it would have been an entirely different way to present games back at that point. So I thought that was actually kind of cool, just like how they had the little video clips in there. That was awesome. The audio we talked about was kind of a mixed bag for me. I did enjoy what they were trying to do, but it just wasn't consistent enough for me in there. And the stages, I did enjoy. I didn't say this when we were talking about it, but when we got to stage 3 or chapter 3, whatever they call it, when we started on like the street of like the city, I was like, wait, what the fuck is happening here? Like, how big is this chapter going to be? Like, I got to go through a city now? What is happening here? I also didn't know the game was going to be like more locations than out in the woods. So even when we started, chapter 2 and it was like someplace else, I was like, oh, okay, this is more variety than I thought it was going to be. Could be argued whether or not it was better or not. I don't know, but it was good. I enjoyed a lot about this, but it wasn't deep enough and didn't have enough full things that I would say knocked it out of the park for me here. So I'm going to go a little lower on this one with a 6.5 on this.
I could jump in quick. Overall, I enjoyed my time with this. It was interesting to play something that was modern made that looked this retro. Like it literally looks like it's just like a port from an old Atari game. It has like your character's made up of like maybe like 20 blocks of color, like all the same color. And shapes of things somewhat resemble what they're supposed to be, but oftentimes are like incredibly crude. And it was the gameplay, as we said, was a bit light at times. I did enjoy the puzzles for the most part. Um, I felt like there was enough variety there, and they sometimes they would give you hints in the notes, and other times it was just kind of like fumble around until they figured out what the solution was. And I did kind of like that. Um, I think the biggest problem I have is the fact that you do have to find notes to make this thing make any sense, and that a lot of those notes are very well hidden, apparently, because like I say, in chapter 3, I believe I ended with like 27 of 44 or something like that. And so I feel like there's a lot of the story there that I was missing. Um, I I do want to say, like, um just the sheer different number of ways that I died during this game was kind of enjoyable in its own way there. And the fact that when you die, like, this this black screen comes up and it says Mortis.
Mortis.
And um that was like enjoyable, like, to the point, like, even my kids like were watching me kind of play this a bit. And now that when they're playing with each other and like they like pretend die, they're like, oh, Mortis. So, it
That's
has like
fantastic.
infected our lives in that way to some degree. um but like, I got killed by a pack of deer, I got run over by a truck, um a dozen different kinds of demons killed me, like, I got shot by the police at one point. um it it was very interesting in all the different ways you could possibly die in this. Yeah, I just wish like the story made more sense. I wish it was more cohesive, because like we said before, with different endings, like literally you die and then come back in the next chapter. um and it just doesn't, there's no explanation as to why that is. But um I think the price point for me is a little high. I think I bought it for like, I think $13 or something, and play this, I somewhere around 7 hours. I think I don't actually, didn't try and keep track, and it doesn't say. Um, and considering that there's, kind of the fault in the amount of storytelling you get, um, it maybe is a little expensive for what it is, but overall, I enjoyed it. I would, if playing something like a retro game sounds like a fun time for you, I probably would recommend it. If you you don't like a retro game experience, I definitely wouldn't recommend this, because that's literally all it is. But similar to you guys, I probably would fall right around. I also, I'd probably go about 6.5 as well. Yeah.
Come on, can we get an average rating of 6.66 on this?
Oh, the last thing I meant to mention, yeah, like, Cody mentioned those animations. I felt like those actually were really, really well done. Like, they were very creepy images.
Yeah.
And producing those with just those very crude um patterns of blocks in just a single color actually worked pretty well for me in a lot of cases. Like, it looked very creepy, and um yeah, I enjoyed those.
Yes.
I was sitting in the dark.
Bleh. All right, I'm going to try to keep this as brief as possible. I think I admire what the developers of this game were trying to do more than I enjoyed playing the game. I said before, I do think that it is pretty effective at being scary, at least fairly often. Um, I think it's interesting that they took this approach to, a modern horror game using this very, very retro style. Um, but I do feel like the gameplay is monotonous. I feel like the game felt overlong. And I think maybe I would have felt that less if the story had been a little bit clearer and, given me more to kind of grasp onto and keep me going. Um, it is impressive that this was made by one person. It is definitely a unique experience. I'm glad Brett mentioned price. I think I paid $15 for this on Switch. If this was under $10, I would probably recommend that pretty much anybody check it out just because it is kind of an interesting experiment. But it feels a little bit pricey to me at $15. Um, all that said, I did not entirely not enjoy my time playing it, but I think I'm going to settle on a score of 6.0 out of 10.
What does that give us as an average, Cody?
I didn't do it. Hold on.
Oh,
God damn it. This
hang on.
keep trying to put our scores next to each other, and it keeps trying to change them into fractions every week. I need to find a new way to do this. Would you say just 6.0?
Correct.
Oh,
Looks like 6.625.
close to the magic number. The ritual will have to wait for now.
6.625. They couldn't even get the number right. God. Way to go,
Uh,
Gary.
all right, but yeah. So if you're interested in checking out a very minimalist take on the horror genre in terms of presentation, and you're not like easily offended by religious stuff, I personally would recommend checking it out. Sounds like we're a bit mixed on this one, but it's certainly a unique game. And I think that's about does it for us. So Joe,
No, no, not
Oh.
Joe.
all right, so if you for some reason had to return to the site of a failed exorcism after a year, like you were contractually obligated, or the police had dirt on you,
Why do you think I
or
showed up
something.
at Cody's Halloween party?
Fair enough. Okay, that answers that question. But wait, there's more. What if to fully exorcise that evil, you had to drink all of the Malort in the house?
Ooh.
I doth love to live deliciously. I think I could get down with the evil. I, I don't need that evil to be gone.
Feels like you're mixing so many song lyrics right now.
Uh,
What what about all the good things that demon did?
oh man. All right. Well, there you have it, folks.
Goodness.
That does it for another episode of Friends Occasionally Not Disagreeing. Hope you all have a good night.
Hail Satan!
Whoa.
Bye.
Bye.
So yeah.
It's okay. We're already off the air in Florida.